What is creativity? Go on, right now, I want you to think about how you would define creativity. In answering this question, each person in this room may have produced a different answer. In fact, we need to use creativity to define it. We might describe creativity as thinking outside the box, but this is a slippery definition. What is the box, and is creativity anything and everything not inside it? When we think of creative people, the names that jump to mind span fields and disciplines. Leonardo da Vinci, Marie Curie, Alan Turing, Toni Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Yahweh Kusama. Innovators in the arts and sciences, mathematics, literature, music, and more. Creators who stepped beyond the conventions of their fields, who seem to look into the future and fashion the world as they see it. Creativity is highly respected. Creativity is also highly valued. 94% of hiring managers who will be hiring for the future study shared that they consider creativity when hiring a job candidate. An IBM survey of more than 1,500 CEOs shared that they believe creativity to be the most important leadership quality. So, given the value that is placed on the elusive quality that is creativity, is it possible for anyone to become creative? Is it possible to learn creativity, to study it, to practice it, to improve at it over time? As an English teacher and a former hip thinking teacher at TEDxAvenuesWorldSchool in New York City, questions about teaching creativity seem urgent and personal to me. I studied creative writing as an undergraduate, and I got my MFA in creative writing. Creative writing, my teachers believed, was something that could be taught. Now, I strive to teach creative writing and a variety of other inherently creative skills, from generating an original thesis statement to crafting individual sentences with fresh and specific word choice. So, how can I best help a student practice or develop creativity? I found an unexpected answer to my questions in poetry, the genre of writing that raises the most complaints from my students, and sometimes nearly identical sighs of frustration from my colleagues. I just don't get poetry, I hear time and again. Here on the screen are two of the towering greats of English language poetry in the 20th century. On the left is Dylan Thomas's quintessential poetic plea that we live our lives fiercely and fully, that we never surrender to death but struggle against it. Thomas was born in Wales in 1914 and lived only to the age of 39. In crafting this particular poem, he was responding to the dark scar that World War II left on his generation. Thomas is widely recognized as one of the definitive voices of his day. I'm going to read his poem together and see what you notice. Do not go gentle into that good night. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning they, do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright, their frail deeds might have danced on a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. On the right is Elizabeth Bishop's masterpiece, One Art, a personal and universal meditation on the impact of loss. Bishop was born in Massachusetts in 1911. She was highly educated. She attended Vassar College, and she received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry within her lifetime. She is recognized as one of the most innovative poets of the 20th century. Let's read her poem together as well and see if you can spot some of the connections. One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones and vaster, some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied, it's evident. The art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. So both of these poems are examples of a much older poetic form, which is called a villanelle. The villanelle originated in the 16th century Renaissance, and it's a highly structured poetic form that often focuses on pastoral or rustic themes. A villanelle must have 5 tercets, followed by a quatrain with 2 repeating rhymes and 2 refrains. Got it? The particulars of tercets and quatrains is less important than the point that to write a villanelle, you have to follow a lot of rules. Rules in poetry might seem distinctly outdated. When we think of rules in poetry, rhyme, or meter, rather than free verse, we think of Shakespeare, Petrarch, Dante, Milton, classical and historical poets whose work might feel inaccessible. So what were these 20th century poets and recognized creative innovators, Dylan Thomas and Elizabeth Bishop, doing when they wrote in a poetic form from the 16th century? When a poet works within a poetic form, they face a variety of constraints. The ways in which they're allowed to express their ideas may seem limited. In writing a villanelle in particular, a poet is limited by repetition, rhyme, and even the number of syllables that can appear in a line. So how could something original, surprising, or creative possibly be created in this constricting form that has been recycled over and over again? Some of you, at the beginning of this talk, when asked to consider the definition of creativity, may have thought of the word freedom. Exercising complete freedom to create, thinking outside the box. Surely that is creativity. But a villanelle, that's a box, a really sturdy box. How could something inside the box be creative? There are many examples of creativity within constraints in these 2 poems, but let us look at one in particular. Stay with me for this. A villanelle needs to have the first and third line of the poem repeat as the alternating last lines of each of the following stanzas. So we can see up here the first line, which is in blue, is repeated as the last line of every other stanza, and the third line, which is in red, is repeated as the last line of the alternating stanzas. We can see how Elizabeth Bishop in One Art maintains this pattern. In repeating these lines over the course of the poem, Bishop insists that a sequence of losses, right? The first one is lost house keys, lost homes, even a lost loved one. Each of these losses more dramatic and painful than the last. She insists that these are not really disasters. Loss is just a part of life. We cannot, Bishop argues, allow loss to surprise or derail us. In the final stanza of a villanelle, stanza 6, those two repeated lines must wrap up the poem, appearing together as lines 3 and 4 of the last stanza. So we, now knowing the poetic form of a villanelle, know where Bishop is headed the entire time, to these two lines. The art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like disaster. And yet, in the final line of the poem, the slight modification that Elizabeth Bishop makes shows us her awareness of the inevitable. Write it, she adds in parentheses in furious italics. In this moment, the poet herself to complete the poetic form. When she finally arrives at the lines that have been planned from the very beginning, lines that say that her real and terrible loss is only like disaster, she experiences in real time the incredible pain of writing the words that she always had to write. My loss is only like disaster. Therefore, the constraints of a villanelle become part of the message and experience of Bishop's poem. We know the form and its rules, and she does too. The form traps her, just as the inevitability of loss traps her, the inevitability of shaking off and minimizing loss, of saying, I'm okay, that traps her. The constraints of the form are used to further her poetic message. Poetic forms and the brilliant power in them show us a new definition and practice of creativity. When faced with constraints, rather than complete freedom, we need to exercise creativity in order to be original. We need to understand context, learn history, consider approaches of others, and synthesizing all of this generate a new way of looking and communicating so that our audience is surprised and engaged. This, I would argue, is true creativity. The exercise not of moving beyond the box, but repurposing and reinventing the box. When I teach creativity in the classroom, I should not forget the value of constraints, of setting rules to follow and overcome, of using limitations to unlock imaginations. The best environment for learning creativity may not be one of total and utter freedom, but one in which we need to work within poetic form.